People used to tell us we were the stable ones. 6 years married, and somehow we'd become the couple other couples pointed to when they wanted to believe it was possible. The renovated kitchen with the marble island Alina picked out over 4 agonizing weekends, the dinner parties where she'd light candles she swore made the wine taste better, the easy rhythm of two people who decided together not to rush into kids. We were going to get there. We had time. That's what I believed anyway, right up until 9:47 on a Tuesday night, when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter, and I happened to be standing close enough to read it. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only thing that's kept me sane since. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't lurking. I was rinsing a wine glass at the sink, 4 feet from where her phone sat face up, charging the way it always did. The screen woke itself for a notification, no swipe, no passcode, just the preview banner doing what preview banners do, a name I didn't recognize, Tyler. And beneath it, 3 lines of a message that didn't need any context to land like a fist. Can't stop thinking about last night. You make me feel like I haven't felt in years. 3 seconds. That's all it was on the screen before it dimmed itself back to black. 3 seconds and an entire architecture I'd spent 6 years building, the timeline of us. The story I told myself about who she was and who we were together came down without a single sound. I want to tell you I dropped the glass. I didn't. I finished rinsing it. I set it in the rack. I dried my hands on the towel that hung from the oven door, the one she always told me to use instead of my jeans, and I did not look at her. This is the part people don't understand about men like me, men raised by fathers who treated emotion as a leak in the hull, something you patch quietly, alone, before anyone notices the boat is taking on water. I didn't yell. I didn't confront her with the phone in my hand, didn't demand she explain who Tyler was or why he was thinking about last night. Some primal, calculating part of my brain, a part I didn't know I had until that exact moment, understood instantly that the second I reacted, I lost. I'd be handing her 3 seconds of warning to build a story, and 3 seconds is all a smart liar needs to start one. So I didn't react. I asked her if she wanted the last of the wine. She said no, she had an early morning. I said good night. I kissed her on the forehead, the way I always did, lips against the same patch of skin I'd kissed 1,000 times before, and I felt absolutely nothing move beneath my own ribs except a kind of cold, focused arithmetic beginning to run. I lay next to her that night and listened to her breathing even out into sleep, and I understood with a clarity that frightened me a little that I was no longer the same man who'd gone to bed the night before. Something in me had reorganized itself around a single objective, not confrontation. Not an explosion of grief and rage that would feel righteous for an hour and accomplish nothing. I didn't need a scene. Scenes are for people who want to be believed. I needed something colder and more permanent than belief. I needed proof. What? I didn't sleep. I lay there counting her breaths instead, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I got up, went down to the den, and sat in the dark without turning on a single light, because I didn't trust my own face yet. Didn't trust what it might be doing without my permission. The mind does something strange when it's been broken open like that. It doesn't just sit with the wound. It goes hunting backward through every memory it has, looking for the moment the wound actually started, because some part of you refuses to believe it happened all at once. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop. The late nights at the office that had crept from once a month to nearly weekly over the past year. The new perfume, something warmer, more expensive than what she usually wore, that I'd complimented her on in March without thinking to ask where it came from. The way she'd started angling her phone face down on tables, a habit so gradual I'd absorbed it without ever consciously registering it as a change. I'd noticed everything and understood nothing, because I hadn't wanted to. That's its own kind of guilt, and I sat with it that night the way you sit with a stone in your shoe you're too tired to stop and remove. By 4 in the morning, I understood something about myself that I think had always been true and simply never been tested. I was a man built for discipline, not for combat. My father didn't raise me to throw plates or scream in driveways. He raised me to absorb a blow, go quiet, and solve the actual problem instead of performing the feeling of having won. I used to think that made me passive. Sitting in that den, I realized it made me dangerous in a way Alina had no reason to expect. Ekos here is the thing about confrontation, the screaming, the accusations thrown across a kitchen at midnight. It doesn't get you the truth. It gets you a performance of remorse or a counterattack or tears that may or may not be real, and by morning she'd have had hours to rehearse a story that bent just enough to survive. Confrontation hands the liar the floor. I wasn't going to hand her anything. I was going to build something she couldn't talk her way out of, something with dates and names and a recording instead of his word against mine. Her word against mine. Documentation doesn't cry. Documentation doesn't beg. Documentation just sits there being true. At 6 that morning, Wednesday now, though it still felt like the same unbroken night, still raw, still hollowed out, I called Jacob. He picked up on the second ring, sounding more awake than anyone has a right to at 6 in the morning, which I suppose is just what 12 years working ER shifts does to a person. He'd learned long ago that the phone ringing early never means good news, and he'd learned to meet bad news head-on instead of flinching from it. "I need a favor," I said. "I can't explain everything yet. I need you to trust me on this." There was a pause, the particular kind of pause that comes from a man recalibrating his entire morning around the tone of your voice rather than your words. "Is Elena okay? Are you okay?" "I will be," I said, and even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. "I just need you to be free Thursday evening. I'll explain everything before then. I just need to know you're in." "I'm in," he said, no hesitation, the way he'd say it to anyone bleeding out in front of him. He didn't know yet how literally that would turn out to apply. What? The days that followed taught me something about myself I'm still not entirely comfortable with. I'm good at this. Not the betrayal part, the methodical part. The part where you take an unbearable feeling and convert it into a spreadsheet. I didn't snoop the way I imagine most people snoop in this situation, frantic, emotional, scrolling through old texts at 2 a.m. with my heart in my throat, looking for the worst possible interpretation of everything. I treated it like a project with a deliverable. I started keeping a private log on my phone, dates and observations only, no editorializing, the same flat language I'd use for a status report at work. Monday. Elena worked from home, said she had calls until 6. Left house 1:40 p.m., said she was running to the store. Returned 3:15 p.m., no shopping bags. I wasn't drawing conclusions yet. I was just collecting points, the way you collect points before you let yourself draw a line through them. I learned Tyler's name properly, not from her phone, which I never touched, but from a comment one of her coworkers made in passing at a happy hour I almost didn't go to, mentioning a Tyler from the gym Elena had been telling people about. I filed it away. I noted which days she worked from home, which days her schedule had the kind of flexible gaps that would let someone slip in and out of our house in the hours I was usually at the office. I never once let her see me piece any of it together. That was the hardest part, harder than the discovery itself in some ways, sitting across from her at dinner, watching her cut her chicken into the same neat, deliberate pieces she always did, asking me about my day in the same warm voice she'd used for 6 years, and answering her normally. Telling her about a client call. Asking if she wanted to watch something after dinner. Somewhere underneath the table, I felt like two different men were sitting in the same chair. One of them still loved her on pure muscle memory, and the other was running a quiet audit of every word that came out of her mouth, checking it against everything he now knew. What I hadn't expected was that she'd get warmer, not distant, not guilty acting in the way people imagine guilt looks, more affectionate, actually. She started reaching for my hand at the table again, something we'd let lapse months ago without either of us mentioning it. She told me unprompted that she felt lucky to have me. For one terrible, disorienting second, I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so badly I could feel the want sitting in my chest like a held breath. But I'd already learned not to trust my want. People don't become more affectionate out of nowhere unless something in them needs you to feel reassured, needs the temperature in the room to stay exactly where it's always been, so that nothing gets disturbed, so that nothing gets looked at too closely. I understood, watching her smile at me over a candle she'd lit for no occasion, that I wasn't looking at love. I was looking at guilt management, performed by someone who didn't know yet that her audience already knew the ending. There was a night that first weekend when I almost broke my own rule. We were lying in bed, the lights off, and She shifted closer to me in her sleep the way she used to when we were newly married, her hand finding my chest out of pure habit. And for a moment I lay there rigid, fighting the urge to wake her up and ask her simply, why? I think that's the part nobody warns you about. That betrayal doesn't just make you angry at the person who did it. It makes you suspicious of yourself, makes you go combing back through your own behavior looking for the crime you must have committed to deserve this. I caught myself doing it more than once that week, and every time I made myself stop. Whatever I had or hadn't done, it didn't entitle her to a lie. I held on to that the way you hold a railing on a staircase you can't see the bottom of. By the following Wednesday, 8 days after the message had first lit up her phone, I had enough. The patterns had repeated themselves twice over, clean and undeniable, and I called Jacob again and told him everything. The message, the name, the pattern of days. He went quiet on the phone for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something steadier, more clinical, the same voice I imagine he uses on people bleeding out in front of him. Thursday, he said, "Your walk, what time do you leave?" 7, same as always. Then nothing changes, he said. You leave at 7, I'll be watching the house. If anyone shows up, you'll know before you've gone 2 blocks. What? Thursday came, and the most important thing about that evening, the detail I clung to like a mantra as I tied my shoes by the door, was that nothing could look different. Not my face, not my voice, not the time I left. Alina was in the kitchen, half watching something on her laptop, and I told her I'd be back in 45 minutes like I told her every single evening of our married life. She said okay without looking up. 6 years of routine had built me the perfect alibi for becoming someone else entirely, just for one night. I stepped out into the warm evening air at exactly 7 and started walking the same loop I always walked down our street, left at the Hendersons' place with the crooked mailbox, toward the greenbelt along the back of the neighborhood. My legs knew the route without my mind being involved at all, which was good, because my mind was somewhere else entirely, counting heartbeats, waiting. 8 minutes in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Jacob. "Someone's here," he said, low, controlled, the same voice he must use when a trauma comes through the doors at 2 in the morning and everyone else in the room is panicking. Side gate. A guy, average height, dark jacket. He let himself in like he's done it before. He's not knocking, Daniel, he's just walking in. I didn't run. I want to be honest about that because I think the running is what people expect, the betrayed husband sprinting home in a blind fury. I didn't do that. Some cold, deliberate part of me understood that running would only get me there faster and angrier, with less control over what happened once I arrived, and control was the entire point. I turned around and walked back the way I'd come, at the same pace, my heart slamming against my ribs while my legs refused to give it anything more than a steady, even stride. Jacob was waiting on the porch when I got there, his face unreadable in the dark, phone already in his hand. "Record," I told him quiet before either of us touched the door. "Whatever happens, you record it, not for a fight, for proof. That's the only reason we're doing this." He nodded once and started his phone recording, and we went inside together, the front door easing shut behind us with the same soft click it always made. The house felt different already, warmer somehow, lived in a way that had nothing to do with me. We didn't call out. We didn't announce ourselves. We moved down the hallway toward the guest bedroom, and that's when we heard it, voices, low and unmistakable, a laugh that was unmistakably hers threaded through with something I'd never once heard directed at me in 6 years of marriage. I won't describe what we heard beyond that. I don't need to, and frankly, I don't want to relive it in more detail than I have to. It was enough. It was more than enough. 20 seconds of audio, dated, time-stamped, located inside our own house, was the only evidence I would ever need for the rest of my life. Jacob stopped the recording. He did it deliberately, a clean cut, because we both understood without saying it aloud that what happened in the next 60 seconds wasn't evidence anymore. It was consequence, and consequence doesn't need a camera. I opened the door. I won't dwell on the scene itself, the scramble. A man named Tyler who was younger than I expected and considerably less composed, grabbing for his clothes, mouth working through the first syllables of an excuse that never finished forming. I told him, in a voice so level it surprised even me, that he had exactly 2 minutes. to leave my house, and that if he ever set foot near it again, the next conversation would not be this calm. He left. He didn't argue. I never touched Alina. I want that on the record as clearly as I can put it, because I know how this story could go in someone else's hands, and that is not the man I am. I stood in the doorway and told her in the same level voice to pack a bag. Tonight. I didn't ask her to explain. There would be time for questions later in places where her answers would actually matter, to a judge, to a lawyer, to her own parents. Not to me, not that night. She tried to speak twice. Both times I simply repeated myself, pack a bag, until she stopped trying and started packing. I stood in the hallway while she did it, and somewhere in the strange, hollowed-out quiet of that house, I understood that the 20-second recording sitting on Jacob's phone was worth more to me than any scream I could have let out, any words I could have hurled at her face. The recording didn't need me to be believed. It simply was true, and now, finally, so was everyone else's understanding of it. She went to her parents that night, and by the following afternoon, a version of events had begun circulating that bore only a passing resemblance to what had actually happened in that hallway. I heard it secondhand, the way you hear most things in a family that's already chosen its side before the facts arrive. Alina had told them I'd overreacted, that Tyler was just a friend from the gym who'd stopped by, that I'd burst in and made a scene out of nothing, jealousy and paranoia I'd apparently been nursing for months. It was an impressive piece of architecture, that story. It had just enough truth in it to be plausible to people who already wanted to believe their daughter wouldn't lie to them. Her father called me 2 days later. I'd always found him a faintly condescending man, the type who'd built one successful business 30 years ago and never let anyone forget it, who'd treated me for 6 years, like the safe, reasonable choice his daughter had settled on, competent, predictable, a little dull, the kind of son-in-law you don't worry about because you assume he'll always be the one to fold first. His voice on the phone had that same easy condescension in it now, the tone of a man who believed he was about to talk sense into someone. "Daniel," he said, "I think there's been a real misunderstanding here. Alina says you completely blew this out of proportion. I'd like us to sit down, the four of us, and just talk this through like adults." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue with him, didn't tell him what I'd heard through that bedroom door, didn't waste a single word defending myself against a story I knew was already collapsing under its own weight. I told him I'd send him something, and that he was welcome to call me back afterward if he still wanted to talk. I forwarded him the recording. He didn't call back. Nobody called back, not for 3 full days, and when Alina's mother finally did reach out, it wasn't to mediate. It was to ask, in a small, chastened voice, whether I intended to be reasonable about the divorce. I told her I intended to be honest about it, which was a different thing entirely, and which I don't think had occurred to anyone in that family as an option until the recording made honesty the only option left standing. I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery within the week. My attorney, a sharp, unsentimental woman named Patricia who'd clearly seen every version of this story before, built the case around 2 pieces of evidence. The message, time-stamped and screenshotted the night it arrived, and the recording, 20 seconds of audio that needed no interpretation at all. Alina's attorney tried, briefly, to argue something resembling entrapment, that Jacob's presence in the house constituted some kind of orchestrated invasion of privacy. It didn't survive a single hearing. Nothing illegal had happened. A man had walked into his own home with a friend he'd invited and recorded what was happening inside it. Tyler was the one who'd let himself in through a side gate that wasn't his. There was no trap. There was only a door that opened on schedule, and the truth standing on the other side of it. The settlement, when it came, wasn't close. I kept the house. I kept my name clean in every sense that mattered, professionally and otherwise, while a version of the truth made its slow, inevitable rounds through people who'd once called us the stable ones. I felt no triumph reading the final paperwork, no fireworks, nothing like the satisfaction movies promise you in moments like this. What I felt was quieter than that, something closer to relief, the particular relief of a man who built a case instead of a scene, and watched it hold up exactly the way he'd designed it to. The same discipline that had let me say goodnight to her with a kiss on the forehead, 3 seconds. After my entire life cracked open on a kitchen counter, was the discipline that finished this. I never once had to raise my voice for anyone to hear me. Her parents called 4 months after the settlement was finalized. I almost didn't recognize her father's voice when I picked up, quieter than I remembered, stripped of the easy condescension that used to live in every sentence he sent my way. He said they'd misjudged me. He said it plainly, without much preamble, the way people apologize when they've finally run out of better explanations to offer themselves. Her mother got on the line briefly, too, said something about wishing things had gone differently, and I let both of them say what they needed to say. I accepted it. I want to be honest about the shape of that acceptance, though, because I think it matters. I wasn't warm about it. I wasn't cold either. I didn't need to punish two people who'd simply believed their daughter the way most parents would. But I'd never been chasing their approval in the first place, not during the marriage, and certainly not after it ended. I'd only ever wanted one thing out of all of this, and it had nothing to do with whether Alina's parents thought well of me. I wanted the truth sitting somewhere solid and undeniable, on the record, where nobody's softened version of events could quietly erode it over time. I had that now. Their apology was just an echo of something I'd already settled inside myself months earlier, standing in a hallway with a recording on Jacob's phone. The house is quieter these days. Not empty, I want to be precise about that distinction because I think people assume those two things are the same and they aren't. Empty implies absence, a hole where something used to be. This isn't that. The marble island is still there. The renovated kitchen is still mine. I cook in it most nights now, just for one, and I've found I don't mind the sound of my own knife against the cutting board nearly as much as I thought I would. The house isn't empty. It's just honest now. In a way it wasn't for at least the last year I lived in it without knowing. I still walk at 7. Same loop down the street, left at the Henderson's place with the crooked mailbox, along the Greenbelt and back. The neighborhood hasn't changed at all, which used to strike me as strange in the weeks right after, that the world could look so exactly the same after something in my life had ended so completely. I've stopped finding it strange. I think I understand now that the world was never going to pause for what happened to me, and there's something almost steadying in that. The porch lights coming on at the same time they always have, the same dog barking at the same fence 2 houses down. I walk alone now. I found I prefer it. People ask me sometimes, carefully, the way you ask someone about a wound you're not sure has finished healing, whether I've forgiven her. I tell them the truth, which is that forgiveness was never really the project. I wasn't trying to arrive at some soft, redemptive place where the betrayal stopped mattering. I was trying to make sure it couldn't be rewritten into something smaller and easier to live with, not by her, not by her parents, not by anyone standing at a safe distance from what actually happened in that house. I made sure of that. The record says what it says, and it will keep saying it long after anyone's memory of that Thursday night has gone soft and unreliable. I didn't need her to admit anything in the end. I only needed the truth to be louder than her. It was,